What if I told you that the UK government is about to make £100 billion worth of debt vanish? That debt is owed in the main to UK pension pots, a heist on about 10 million British pensions. No mask, no force, just a small change to the tax code, and it's gone.
That this is organised crime at its top level, planned and executed with military precision.
This all starts, like basically everything nowadays, with inflation. More specifically, how we measure inflation. Remember, we measure inflation using a basket of goods and services that are meant to represent common things that people buy. Don't ask me how I got the basket. Fucking drive, Glenn! All sorts of things make it into this basket. Chocolate, mangoes, alcohol, action cams, vinyl records, loads of different types of goods and services. You can access the full list on this website here, I'll leave it linked below for you. But I think the random list that I just picked out kind of highlights a problem with the measurement for inflation. What should we include in the basket? How should we calculate it? This really is the question at the centre of this sleight of hand. There are a few different measures or calculations for inflation. Originally we had RPI, the Retail Price Index. It was introduced in 1956. Before then we used something called the Cost of Living Index from 1914 to 1947. And then the Interim Index of Retail Prices from 1947 until 1956. The more modern CPI, the Consumer Price Index, was introduced in 1997. The key difference between these two, RPI included a measure of housing costs. CPI doesn't. There is a version of CPI that includes some housing costs called CPIH. The H stands for housing. Okay, so for the longest time, RPI was the official measure of inflation. That was until 2013, where RPI was dropped as a national statistic. The UK Statistics Authority did a review and said that RPI is fundamentally flawed as a measure. Without getting too lost in the inflation weeds here, RPI uses something called the Carley formula. And what they basically found was, when inflation spikes, but then prices come back down again, this Carley formula still makes it look like prices stayed higher overall. In other words, RPI gets stuck artificially high, while CPI, which uses a different method, drops back down in line with the actual prices. It originally cost 3, it went up by 2, it went down by 2 again, but now it's worth 4. Doesn't make sense really. And that discrepancy was adding about 1% a year to the inflation figure every year. And when your target is 2%, an extra 1% a year is a pretty big deal. The Office for National Statistics said, okay, this is not a good measure for inflation, we no longer recognise it at all. All very fascinating for you, I'm sure. Real edge of your seat stuff. So what's my point? Well, this decision not to recognise RPI anymore doesn't just undo decades of financial contracts and commitments and measurements that use RPI. Vehicle and excise duty and car tax still rise in line with RPI. So does air passenger duty, regulated rail fares. Student loan interest is set off RPI, ground rents on properties, and even the rate that O2 and Virgin Media and things like this increase by, your phone bills. That's all linked to this fundamentally flawed index. But all of that is peanuts, because it is nothing in comparison to these. This is a government bond. In the UK, we call them gilts. It's essentially an IOU. You can lend some money to the government and they will give you a rate of return on that money. And then at the end of the term, they'll give you your money back that you originally lent them. There's a lot of these things floating about. So much so that we have a UK debt management office just to keep tabs on them. And they produce this report that details all of the different gilts out in issue. At the top here in very tiny writing, you can see a very big number indeed. 2,757 billion, 2.7 trillion. They split the list into 2 different types of gilts. So at the top here, you've got conventional gilts. All that basically means is the return that you get from the gilt is set. You know exactly what you're going to get when you purchase this bond. Then down here, you have what are known as index-linked gilts. So these index-linked gilts track something. They track inflation. And the measure of inflation that they track, yep, you guessed it, is RPI. So the amount of money that these bonds pay out varies over time, and it's linked to RPI. That's why they have a nickname. They're called linkers. The vast majority of the UK's bonds, around 70%, are conventional gilts. But the other 30% are these linkers. And these as a product are really attractive to, say, defined benefit pension schemes, because those schemes promise to pay an inflation-linked income to the people who are in the scheme. And these products give an inflation-protected income as well. The UK has the highest proportion of inflation-linked debt in the world. We're talking around 30-ish different types of these index-linked gilts, and they total about 620 billion. And the amount they pay out, again, is linked to RPI. Well, for now. Just before we look at what's going on with RPI, let me tell you about today's video sponsor, Tide, and their instant access business savings account. I have money stashed in accounts all over the place. Stocks and shares in multiple account types on multiple different platforms, short-term bond funds, premium bonds. But Tide's instant access business savings account is a very special use case for me. I use Tide's instant savings account to ring-fence all of the tax money from my limited companies. So I don't spend it, basically. I just slap it into Tide where it generates a return and then I can forget about it. I've been using this account now for around 18 months. I love that it's instant access, that it has no fees for withdrawals, and that it's easy to use and it keeps my money for HMRC away from me. New Tide members can get up to 4% AER variable for 6 months. I say up to because it depends on how much you deposit in your account. The more you save, the higher the rate. You can get this deal plus cash back if you fund your Tide account with £5,000 in the first 30 days and if you use the code MAKINGMONEY. So that's making money, all one word. I'll leave a link in the description and the pinned comment for you as well as the full terms and conditions of the offer, which of course apply. The variable rate that I quoted is correct as of the 18th of September 2025. Right, let's get back to the video. It's September 2022. And I don't know if you remember, but the UK was chaos.
Hasta la vista, baby.
I am resigning.
I think that chaos is why this slipped under the radar. In a summary of a High Court judgment into a review of whether the UK government acted lawfully or not, 5 pension funds accused the government of wrongdoing. Some real heavy hitters here. 5 pensions, BT, Marks and Spencer's, Ford, versus the Chancellor of the Exchequer. At the time, it was Nadeem Zahawi, who was about to lose his job in 5 days due to a tax avoidance scandal. He would be replaced by Kwasi Kwarteng, and I'm sure that went okay.
I've never known a budget cause a financial crisis immediately like this.
But the Chancellor who actually caused this review was Rishi Sunak, who was Boris Johnson's Chancellor at the time. Okay, so what are these pension companies so miffed about? Remember before that I told you that CPI doesn't account for housing costs? But I did say there is a version of CPI that includes some housing costs called CPIH. Well, in 2020, Rishi Sunak announced that the way RPI measured housing costs would be tweaked and rewritten slightly to reflect the way that CPIH does it. That shift means that they stop measuring mortgage interest payments or actual rents paid by homeowners, and instead what they do is they measure a proxy or an estimation of the owner-occupier's rent on their own home. So what they would have to pay to rent their own home. On one hand, this makes CPIH less volatile and a more stable measure. On the other hand, it does not reflect the actual cost of buying and living in a home because it's a proxy measure, it's an estimation. So what's the big deal? I keep saying that, don't I? The court document spells it out. Because of flaws in the methodology of the RPI, the index produces inflation figures about 1% higher than the CPIH index. This is referred to as the wedge. That 1% difference is why I'm making this video. I suspect it's why the government really want this change, and it's definitely why 5 pension companies took the government to court, but they lost. The court deemed that these changes were lawful. They said the government did nothing wrong, and they fell back on this. The Statistics and Registration Service Act of 2007, Section 21. This law sets out what powers the UKSA has to amend statistical measures like RPI. But I went through the details of this court document and I just can't help but feel that these pension companies have a point. The anticipated 1% reduction in RPI from 2030 onwards, affecting future interest payments to holders of the gilts, is said to have resulted in the value of the relevant gilts falling by around 90 to 100 billion pounds. That's the big figure that pension companies will push out to try and grab headlines. How that's been calculated is by assuming that this will save the government around 6 billion a year in debt interest payments. I guess the next question is, who was that debt interest due to be paid to? About 10.5 million people in the UK have private sector defined benefit pensions, the majority of which are linked to RPI. It's said that they will receive reduced payments amounting to around 4 to 9% of their lifetime benefits on average, and women are more likely to be affected. It's not even just this debt interest thing, is it? It's this point that those defined benefit schemes are likely going to increase by less than was expected going forwards. The government has changed the definition of RPI, and that allows them to essentially claim, though, that they still report on it, it's still there, when in reality, that shift in calculation is likely to save them 1% a year. That decision happened behind closed doors at a time the media circus was focused on other, more pressing things. So it's gone largely unreported. but it will potentially cost those with these pensions between 4 and 9% of their total pension benefit. That's a lot of money. Just on a human level, if I agree to borrow money off you, and then one day I turn around and go, oh yeah, the terms of the loan, I'm changing those, and they're going to benefit me, is that not defaulting on the debt? Some might even call it theft. I mean, I'm hardly one to talk right.
Why are we driving, Colin?
I don't want to imply scandal here. I mean, I probably just did. The government, they're in a tough spot financially, and they're trying to find ways to fill gaps in the budget. In a lot of ways, then, you could call this move progressive, but it's also another example of that sort of sneaky manoeuvres, stealth taxes, fiscal drag, financial gymnastics politics that we've seen loads of in recent years. For example, why is the start date 2030? If this was something that made sense and it was sensible to do, it was good for everyone, why not just do it right now? That's because the gilts that were issued between 1981 and 2002 contain a clause that allows the holders to cash the bonds back in if there's a fundamental change to RPI. Clearly, this is a fundamental change. The last gilts of this kind will mature in 2030. They're waiting for the ones that could be cashed in to mature before this kicks into action, because any issued after 2002, well, they don't have that issue anymore. Okay, some balance here. This changing of the RPI rule might be sensible and it will benefit some in society. Railway passengers, student loans and utility bills may increase by less due to that change. But I do think it's fair to say that the main beneficiary of this is the government. In a way, you've sort of got to respect the hustle here, haven't you? What they've managed to pull off is a reduction in the debt burden by over $6 billion a year in the blink of an eye. No need for new legislation or complex contractual changes. No need to compensate existing gilt holders. It is, in essence, the perfect crime. Legal? Yes. Ethical? Questionable. But for most people, totally unnoticed. What would you call it? A sensible policy adjustment? A clever accounting trick? Or maybe it's the greatest bond heist in British history?
Just